Thank you, Mr. President, tribal delegates, elders, community leaders, and everybody else that's here celebrating today. I wanted to start by, in very kind of brief summary of the things that have happened in 100 years and then talk about employment. But when you think about our chiefs from 100 years ago and all our people and the challenges they had as times were changing, Native culture and our Native people weren't necessarily celebrated in our own homeland, to today, when earlier many of us were at the university also starting its 100-year celebration. Thank you, Chancellor Rogers, for the invitation. Native people and Native culture kicked off that celebration and were celebrated. And that continued throughout the day. And what a powerful statement that was. So again, thank you to those at the university for acknowledging. And it's not that we're the only people in the interior now. We certainly have many others that are our relatives, friends, co-workers, and we all make the community that we live in. But I'm going to start with where we were in 1915. Of course, parts of our region, there was no contact in 1915 with non-Native people. Some parts of our region, it had been just a few years, less than a lifetime for sure. And at that time, these men who represented our people foresaw the challenges, and one of them was how to live in an economic environment that was changing very rapidly. Certainly at that time, for our Native people who'd been in contact with those non-Natives coming into the community, there were certain jobs available. They tended to be jobs like cutting wood for the steamships, hauling, portering, laboring in mines, hunting, fishing, trapping to trade with those folks who were coming in. But what we didn't have, certainly, we didn't have doctors, didn't have university professors, we didn't have corporate leaders, and those people were coming into the interior as well. And we know that from the meeting. The meeting was with the judge and the representative in Washington, D.C. And folks here in Fairbanks, if you look at the pictures from 1915 of the communities in the interior, there were a lot of big communities now that no longer exist, or they don't exist in the same size and scale. Mining communities, communities building railroads and ports in Alaska. And as those jobs left, the communities shrank. Some of them are no longer there. Some of them certainly are our 42 tribal communities in the interior. But the chiefs foresaw that employment was going to be a very big challenge for our people in the interior who did not have the same skills needed for the changing environment. And so they talked about that with Judge Wickersham. We're certain they talked about that amongst themselves. As we know, throughout our region and throughout the state, in fact, people came together. I was privileged to be in Southeast with our Lieutenant Governor and others last week for ceremonies, and looking back at 100 years or more of history there, celebrating those that came and what they brought to us as Native people, and what we shared with those coming to our state as well. So I'm going to fast forward almost a whole 100 years, and some of this stuff is actually in your material in the packets that are out here. A very powerful thing happened a couple of years ago here in the interior. The Native organizations got together and commissioned an economic impact study. President Isaac was Tanana Chiefs president then. Between Doyon, TCC, our interior tribes and village corporations, Fairbanks Native Association, Danakanaga, Interior Regional Housing Authority, Chancellor Rogers' firm, Information Insights, was the one that gathered the data. And the results were stunning. I think they stunned everyone who read the results at just what an economic impact the Native organizations in 2010 brought to the interior. I'll just summarize a few facts from that study. It was published in 2012, but it was using 2010 data. At the time in 2012, direct employment from our Native organizations was 3,700 employees in the interior, $145 million annually in wages. The total economic impact of our Native organizations, direct and indirect in the interior, was over $300 million annually. We called a meeting of the interior state legislators together and our Native leadership at that time to present those facts. And again, I think it was somewhat overwhelming to all of us to kind of look at those numbers and see how far our people had come in that time. We know what that means, especially those of us who've had the privilege of working for our Native organizations. They create the opportunity for our young people. We provide scholarships for higher education. We found out we're among the most generous of people in the state between what we provide to nonprofits and in donations, as well as to our foundation for scholarships and education. All of those things came from the foresight of the chiefs at that time, of the leaders who got AFN together and created Doyon through the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act and our village corporations, the leadership of our tribal organization who created TCC's health system, a world-class Native health system in the interior. All of these things came in the first 100 years. I want to tell you just briefly where Doyon is 5 years later in 2015. Of course, we talk about employment every now and then with our board, and many of them are here. How about we recognize the Doyon board? We have three right in the middle here: Victor, Nicholas, Wally, Carlo, PJ Simon. Anna Miranda Wright's over here. Who I missed? Somebody's in here. Anyway, we at Doyon talk about employment all the time. It is one of our highest priorities. And in 2015, we're 3/4 of the way through our fiscal year. We will pay this year more than $40 million in wages to Doyon shareholders. In this year, we will have employed about 800 Doyon shareholders. Those were things that were unimaginable just a few years ago. And in fact, when I started at Doyon 9 years ago, we were paying about $20 million in wages and had about, well, I know in 2010 we had 550 Doyon shareholder employees. So you can see what happens when you focus as an organization on certain results that you want from that organization. And it takes leadership and it takes courage and it takes a lot of persistence. You can get there. But it's not about 1915 or only about 1915 or 2015. As every other speaker said, it's about 2115. And where will we be then? And we know, despite our successes, there are still many challenges. In fact, it might have been better in 1915 in some of our rural communities with regard to a cash economy than it is now. And we don't know where it's going in the next 100 years. We do have challenges to meet, but we also have many tools. The other panelists are going to talk about some of those tools. Education. We certainly have our lands, or as Spud Williams eloquently said, a portion of our lands still, 12.5 million acres of Doyon lands. And those are opportunities we have, as well as our corporations and our tribal organizations, to provide opportunities in our communities here in Fairbanks, in interior Alaska, to meet the challenges that we know will come to us. Some of them we can see now, as I talked about, rural economies, and we have opportunities to develop resources and rural jobs. But some of them we certainly don't know what they are 100 years from now. But we do know through values and all those tools I've mentioned, our people will find a way. We certainly know that. We always do. We're tough, we're united, we stand together and rise up to any challenge. And again, on behalf of the Doyon Board and all of our shareholders, we certainly appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this historic gathering here, celebrating 100 years since 1915. Seni Asito Embassy.